Guy, it's wonderful to have you here with us this morning. Really appreciate you coming on and let's really wanting to hear your perspectives really on broadcast media. One of the reasons for this conversation is I've been doing some consulting work with a broadcast media monitoring agency called eMedia Monitor. And I know that media training is your thing. So I think most of our conversation this morning is going to be about how broadcast media is perhaps evolving and how it's changing and your perspectives on how that may be influencing the way your practice works and perhaps the differences that you have to focus on when you're training spokespeople and company representatives for the media. But before we start, can you give us a potted history of how you came to be running Clapperton Media Associates and how your focus came to be, I think, more on the spoken word and the visuals as much as the written word?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you. So first of all, I started off as a technology journalist in 1989. Good grief, that's a long time ago. Got freelanced during the recession in 1993. And started writing for all sorts of nationals, mostly because at the time you couldn't walk into a newsagent without seeing a wall of technology publications. And I thought, if that's my market, there's good news. There's a lot of them. Bad news is that's not going to be sustainable. They're going to go away. So I focused on the nationals and started pitching, and that got my profile a little higher. So people started asking me if I offered media training as well. My first media training client was Microsoft, in only one executive from Microsoft, but nonetheless Microsoft, in 2002. The story I always tell in my media training sessions is that I just had a bank statement, so when they asked if I offered media training, I thought, oh yes, that sounds very likely. What's media training? So I very quickly became aware that I really enjoyed leaving the room with people being more confident than leaving the room with people thinking, what have I just told the journalist? What's he going to say in the press? So I focused on pushing on that and making sure that people knew that I offered it. I still get asked from time to time, do you offer media training by any chance? So, you never assume everybody knows. In terms of the visual push, people started asking about cameras in about when I was about 10 years in. So I'd been making corporate videos with a camera guy called Paul Angel. And so we just sort of got together on a one-off basis initially, and he offered the visual dimension, but because he came in not just with a little, a digital SLR camera like I might use to record the sessions. He comes in a great big suitcase full of kit and a sound boom and things like that, and it really is lighting in people's faces, stuff like that. And the session is just transformed. That's what people really want. Even if their focus is going to be on the written media, they still, certainly the public relations industry, still prefers to have their clients prepared for the next thing rather than just the immediate things. So Paul and I do a lot more work with Paul than without him at the moment. In fact, it's been a few months probably since I did any training, except virtual training over Zoom. Without Paul, or Paul or another camera guy. I was working with David Gridley last week. He's also an excellent camera person, again, who I knew from when he owned an actual media training studio. So that's how it happened.
And has the tech that they've used to record, I mean, changed? I know you said, it comes with more than just an SLR camera, but are there occasions now where broadcast media interviews don't require all the lights, camera, and the action perhaps they might have done in the past, or are the old ways still there?
The old ways are still there. I'm going to show. We just did a little promo video with my opera singing daughter giving some tips. That's on LinkedIn just recently. Paul is filming her with his serious kit, but in that video there are a couple of clips of them of Paul filming her, and that was actually taken by me with this little thing, which is
Uh,
it's called a pocket something or other. I can send you this thing so you can put it in the show notes or something. It's
Yes.
and that is gives you you can do a 4K picture quite happily with that, except it takes up an awful lot of memory. But the thing is that for training, people still need the theatre of having that camera, the big camera equipment, the big microphone, although the clipped-on microphone, but the big sound boom as the backup, and the big light shone in their face. They still require that. So even though there's no real sort of need for it. You've got to try and mimic that that full studio experience if you can. So the full rig is still what most clients want.
Are you finding that this opportunity for more spokespeople, more corporate or organisational representatives to appear on perhaps TV, radio, and so on, perhaps from their offices without that need to travel, has increased representation, perhaps of some groups that might not otherwise have received the invitations to appear on these channels, or has it helped some people to shine? I definitely have felt in my own career that the safety blanket of doing webinars and presentations from the comfort of my home office without seeing the whites of the eyes of the people in the conference room has allowed me to blossom. And do you find that those who you work with, perhaps their confidence may have grown due to some of these more sort of barriers that we have to actually seeing the whites of our
I
audience's
think
eyes?
there are two important factors to that, which are not to do with the technology. Well, they are to do with the technology. First of which is in the corporate world, you can take a lot of cost out of it. For example, when I train one of my clients in particular, they often get people who are in different countries at the same time. The the other possibility would be to fly me out to France, Spain, Israel, wherever else they happen to be operating. So it takes the cost out, and also there is the opportunity to talk to people who are in different territories completely. So I think I've seen that in the corporate world, and of course in the social media world, or where it blurs a little. YouTube is basically a social network for video, but it's also where Google Film, as it used to be, lives. So you can have your collection of your blockbuster movies on there as well because you can buy them. So is that video? Is it streaming? Is it social media? It's blurring. I think those
It
lines.
definitely feels like the definition of broadcast itself is blurring, and I wonder if you've got any reflections on that. Because in the old days, it used to be TV, radio, but it's so much more now, isn't it? What does
TV,
broadcast
radio,
mean for
and
you?
yeah, the one that gets to me at the moment, and I've sounded off about this on Substack and in on LinkedIn, is what exactly is a podcast? We are probably recording a podcast right at the moment, but is it a podcast? Well, podcast in my definition is an audio program. We're on video, so it's not television because it's not going to be broadcast. But it's the idea of a vodcast never took over. It's only people like us who worry about these definitions, by the way. It's only the media people. Everybody else says, "Oh, you can watch that one. Oh no, you just have to listen to that one." They don't care. There's no reason they should. So yeah, I think the nature of that is, and of course, there's visualized radio, as they call it.
So, with this kind of longer form opportunity that comes with the podcast, with the with the visualized radio and so on, does it change the way in which you need to train and coach people? Because
Mm.
perhaps in the past it was all about trying to sneak everything into a minute or two soundbite, or knowing that out of a half an hour conversation it might make 2 minutes onto air. But now there's the opportunity to listen to the whole conversation, warts and all, without anything edited out. And does that change the way in which you train people?
Yeah. To an extent, I've always told people, try not to be too blatant with the bridging. Try to, make sure you do answer the question, but make sure you fill in some details, but don't confuse people with too much detail. People think that media training is going to be about artifice. They think it's going to be about taking stuff. About deceiving people. It's really not. It's about focus. It's about making sure that you don't confuse the listener or the journalist who's not a specialist in your field with too much extraneous detail. So those things haven't changed. But with a podcast, yes, of course, you could be a bit more discursive. You've got the opportunity to be a bit more yourself, really. But you should also be yourself when you're delivering the short sound bursts, because otherwise you turn into the corporate droid, and it's just obvious you've memorized an answer, and no one wants to hear that. If you can do a Q&A on the web, just written Q&A, and people could pick it all up from there, just do that if you don't want to engage properly.
I always think now with this longer form, it just gives an organization the space to breathe and to deliver their messages perhaps in a more natural way than having to try and shoehorn a key message into a question that doesn't really ask the question that warrants the answer
I
with the
think
message included in it. It
I
takes the
think
pressure off, does it?
it takes the pressure off, but it also gives you it's a great opportunity because of course the longer form means that you've got a really good opportunity to focus on why. Have you cut X amount of jobs? The answer might be yes. The answer might also be yes, but in order to, we cut 100 jobs in order to preserve the other 500. Otherwise, they would all be in jeopardy. You can then, with the longer form, you can backfill and say a little bit about your suppliers' pressures. You can say about the economic pressures around the world, which most people are probably going to know anyway. But you can certainly make sure that you give them something rather than just a really bland account of what yes or no answers.
So last week we just came back, a few of us, from the AMEC summit, which was held in Dublin. AMEC being the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, and one of the areas that was a hot topic there was GEO, generative engine optimization, and AI. And there are elements to which there are brilliant some practical tips being shared with the audience there, including things such as when you post content onto YouTube, for example, to also post transcripts of that content to make that the content that's within video or audio clips much more sort of findable and actually working much harder for you in terms of how that content is retrieved by AI systems. I just wondered if you'd picked up any other of those kind of tips along the ways to help clients perhaps optimize some of these new forms of audio visual content that
I would
people are focusing along the way.
I would go further. I've been using, well, I haven't done it recently just because I've got a bit lazy and I must start doing it again. I've been using Otter.ai to transcribe my podcasts and to transcribe my LinkedIn tips. Actually, LinkedIn does it automatically and gives it a fairly good, has a fairly good hit rate of accuracy. So I think it's important to do those things, and I must go back and get my podcasts and my last series of podcasts transcribed. Apart from anything, you don't want to exclude people because they have a hearing issue. And it's difficult because I'm a man of a certain age and I have three outstanding good points. I've got a good head of hair still. I've got this. I have been accused of having a Radio 4 voice, which has very rarely been on Radio 4, but that's what it's apparently called, and several of my own teeth. But apart from that, I'm inclined to use the voice, but not everyone can hear it. Not everybody will welcome it, indeed. And if you're in a noisy office already, you don't want to be listening to my pearls of wisdom. You might well prefer to be reading them.
No, it's a matter very close to my heart. My mother was very deaf. She actually has a cochlear implant, and so matters relating to understanding what's being said on the screen
Hmm.
and the need for subtitles has
But of
been
course,
part of my life very much.
an incoming generation of deaf community rejects the cochlear implant. Several of them are quite happy being deaf. They now have the recognition of British Sign Language as an actual language. And
That's
yes,
true.
when they speak out loud, there is a deaf accent, I find, because they can't hear the noise. So you get, I'm not going to imitate it, but you get a slight sort of approximation of our. So I think we just got to learn to respect that and understand that cochlear implants aside, not everybody's going to want that. So it's down to me, frankly, if I want to sell to these people as well, or to get them recommending me, it's down to me to make myself as
Mm.
comprehensible as I possibly can.
But I guess the closed caption element of the video content that we put out for that reason and for many other reasons remains really important, not just for those with hearing
Hmm.
or deafness issues, but also those of us that are actually scrolling through things like LinkedIn on the sofa next to our hubby whilst watching TV. So you're still kind of working whilst having, a bit of downtime at the same time. Or for those who perhaps English may not be their first language, coming
Mm.
from an international community and are very interested in what we have to say, but sometimes when we speak in our mother tongue, we speak fast. So just do you encourage your clients to also use closed captions, and is it for those reasons, or are there other reasons that I haven't thought of?
It hasn't come up, and so because we tend to be coaching people on media training, which is basically for interviews. So it'll be up to the person who's interviewing them to provide closed captions, etc. However, I'm sure you'll find as of the next time I'm training somebody to speak in front of an audience, I will certainly be mentioning closed captions. I always so thank you for the idea, is what I'm saying. I hadn't actually mentioned it before. Of course, it's important, and that's why I love doing interviews like this, because people will accidentally suggest things that improve my offering as well. Great. So I certainly am sensitive to speaking too quickly for people who are in a second language. Also for watching out for things like idiom, for accidentally tailoring your stuff for local your local references. There is a danger, I think, of people like me assuming everybody else is like me, and that's a middle-aged white man, and it's very sort of 1980s, 1970s to calibrate everything for a middle-aged white man. Just because I am one of them doesn't, I think, well, that sounds good to me. You've got to sanity check it with other people. So, and of course, humor is the other thing that doesn't necessarily translate everywhere. So I think there's an awful lot to take into account there.
Yeah, even with cultures with similar language, the humour doesn't translate at all. So.
Oh, and, well, you mentioned you're based up north. There are, there's a huge tradition of northern comedy, not all of which translates terribly well down south, and I'm sure the same is true either side. So it's not just between countries.
No, it's brilliant you're bringing these topics up, actually. Unfortunately, Guy, you weren't at the AMEC Summit last week in Dublin, so
I
you
feel
missed some of these
terrible. Yeah.
sessions that I keep referring to. But there was a brilliant session on cultural intelligence, which I also linked back to a message delivered is not always a message received. And I think
Mm.
that's also an interesting concept to share with corporate spokespeople who are speaking to the media, because they sometimes intend to say one thing and those words may come out of their mouth, but actually what is heard and understood by the audience is something completely opposite.
I always try to brief my clients to start off. First, you start off with the audience or the recipient, or never mind the journalist. It's their readers, their listeners. That's who actually matters. If you're trying to increase sales, for example, the journalist was never going to buy 1,000 iPhones as distinct from 1,000 Samsungs. That's just that's not part of our world. But the person who reads it, who receives the eventual message, might. So it's a matter of calibrating those messages to to the readers, but basically starting off with your desired endpoint. So your endpoint isn't to land your message. Your endpoint is that people are going to buy more of your phones. Your endpoint is that people are going to think you're a great place to work, whatever your endpoint happens to be. And then you start working backwards from there, and that will start to tell you where you really ought to be pushing your message. For example, and this is where the PR people's professionals are invaluable, because they will help guide those. They're like your sat nav. You tell them where you want to end up. They will advise on the best and most achievable ways of doing it. I had a client once when I was very new to media training who confessed to me that he had been offered a profile in the Financial Times as a small business person, and he turned it down. And I'm thinking of, youngish journalists by then, or younger than I am now. I was thinking, but you can't turn down the FT. That's the biggest journal. I mean, how can you possibly? Terrible idea. And he then said to me, he said, well, I've got a mobile phone shop. He said, or a mobile shop, whatever he called it, or four of me. I didn't say Reading. He said he would be much better off with coverage in the Reading Advertiser, because the amount, or whatever it's Reading Chronicle, whatever it's called. So he said, much better off with a decent interview in that than the FT, because the amount of people who think, I need a new phone, let's go and read an interview in the FT. It just doesn't happen. And he was quite right. It would have been lovely vanity piece for him, which is not how the FT would have seen it. But it would have been mostly for his vanity, whereas he would have been much better off in terms of prioritizing his time to speak to a publication that was actually going to be speaking to the likely buyers.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. You're really speaking AMAC language here, Guy, because you're encouraging us to think about the outcomes first, and
Mm.
then the activity that we do to get there is just one of the methods to actually achieve the end goal. But it's all about understanding what the objective is in the first place before going ahead and just doing it for the sake of it. And then as a measurement nerd, a self-confessed measurement nerd, I'm always intrigued to understand for different organizations, success looks different. And so, speaking to you just now, obviously trying to get the spokesperson to focus on the objective and the outcome is potentially a measure of success. But do you have any other metrics of success in your world that make a successful piece of training sort of show its true colors to you? And what does
Yeah, the
then success
feedback.
look like for the client?
The feedback's always important, but before I will do any piece of training, I will insist on having once we've agreed terms, I will insist on, which happens after one conversation with the PR person typically, I will then have another conversation in which we get right down to, okay, what do you need to come out of this? What are your objectives? What do you need me to achieve from this? And sometimes it can be, well, he's a bit salesy, so we need to take the jargon out. So I'll go in a little bit more aggressive than they need confidence. They're really good, but they don't believe they're really good. That'll mean I'll be doing something else entirely. So it's always based on what the client actually needs me to deliver. I've got best part of 40 years experience nowadays, but I became a journalist, as I said, in 1989, so it's not quite 40 years, but I've got a lot of experience to draw on, and so I will try to tailor that outcome as far as I possibly can.
But I was just wondering if you go about perhaps um, analysing the opportunity that may be arising in a sense of sort of doing some due diligence or intelligence ahead of a big ticket interview or perhaps a keynote speech or so on to help coach the representative
Mm.
to bring out anecdotes that are relevant to target audience and so on. How
Yeah,
do you go about preparing them from that point of
I
view?
think you've got to tailor absolutely everything. There's no point in me saying, yeah, I'll charge you this amount just for my usual spiel. That's just ridiculous. So yeah, everything is absolutely tailored. I always try to have the PR person in the room when their schedule allows, and I also talk up the public relations executives or the public relations professionals' role and importance, and when they should be talking, when the client should be talking to them. So yeah, it is all tailored. I'm not as scientifically focused as you obviously are. There's a lot of sort of objectives by the seat of the pants, but it's all about talking to the public relations people and making sure that we deliver as a team with them really what is actually required.
And do you work with them on an international basis too? Are there opportunities for them to perhaps go and speak in other markets? And again, that takes probably, as you mentioned before, different kind of skill, different kind of way of expressing oneself to make one's
Yeah.
anecdotes universally recognized.
Yes, and there are a few skills you need internationally. When I over a decade ago, I wrote one of the first books on social media in the UK, called "This Is Social Media," and I got invited to go out and do a sort of keynote for Adobe in a number of countries throughout Europe. And I that was the first time I'd worked with an interpreter, simultaneous interpreting. So of course I would deliver one of my hilarious jokes, and there would be no laugh. And I thought, they hate me. They absolutely hate me. These Italians don't like me at all. And so I just carry on. And then a few minutes later, the laugh would occur because, of course, they hadn't heard the joke yet because of the interpreter. But I've also worked internationally, and one of my regular clients often has people from different nationalities on the Zoom call with me, and we
And
practice
who
each
would
other.
have thought all those years ago when you wrote that book about social media, which probably started off as more of a text-based mechanism, to be so dominated now by actual, audio-visual communication?
It's
I think it's that
That is
first more than
interesting.
anything.
It was to an extent, although there was already YouTube. I wrote it in 2009. Well, it was published in 2009. I was working on it in 2008, I suppose. But yeah, there was video. YouTube did exist. They had filmed that first video, which was at the zoo, which I think had some penguins or elephants or something, animals of some description. I think it existed, but it was very much little clips on really bad, as we would now think, really bad quality. So yeah, I think the other thing about the media, so I'm thinking aloud here, rather. The other thing about the video element, it hasn't taken off as we'd anticipated. I remember when all this started in sort of the late 2000s, people were suddenly going to video. There was a lot more social media. All the papers really were going onto the web. A lot of us assumed that this is it. They're all going to turn into virtual television programs. There's going to be There was Guardian TV, there was Telegraph TV or whatever they called these things, video interviews, things like that. And a lot of us thought that's it, the written word is dead as a standalone medium. What's happened is that the audience has responded, and yes, they do like a little bit of video, but if they go to the Times, the Guardian, they would much rather be reading. If they go to the BBC, oddly, the BBC they would also quite like to be reading because, of course, the BBC's news website has taken off massively. But there's still this, if they go to BBC iPlayer, they do not want to read; they want to watch stuff. So I think it's put the choice in the hands of the consumer, really.
Then, of course, we do see some of those traditional broadcast outlets now also saying they're going to have a sort of not quite a YouTube first strategy, but you do see the BBC and the national broadcasters here in the UK actually putting out their content on YouTube as well, because there is the next generation for whom don't even have a TV screen in the first place. I've been trying to donate a beautiful Roberts Radio family heirloom type thing to my 24-year-old daughter,
Mm.
but even radio doesn't seem to click with them in the same way that it does for us. So what are we going to do with the next generation? I suppose they're just going to be
Well, we'll
still
just
listening, but just a different stuff.
I think our generation is going to be the oddity because these things have changed so much. Radio started in the 1920s, then television started in the 30s, and the radio was going to knock out theatre, and that didn't happen. They just realigned, and the television was also going to knock out radio. That didn't happen either. But then after sort of the coronation in the 1953, which is when TV really started to become popular, there was then this almost solid 50, 60 years when there was very little change. Yes, there was satellite TV. Yes, there was multi-channel in this country. It had been around in the US for quite some time and elsewhere. But it felt quite sort of solid and quite regular and quite established in this country. Then the changes started again. But I think it's that 50, 60-year time frame which is going to be seen as the blip. I think that's the unusual period of time. We're now back into constant change because technology changes.
And I suppose, again, with my measurement hat on, that makes media fragmentation and the sort of fragmentation of these audiences does make it harder, because one has to perhaps work so much harder now to reach the audiences one used to, which one you could have achieved through a TV interview on evening news and perhaps reach a massive proportion of the UK population. Less so now because not as many people are watching it. But
Hmm.
then also TV or radio content can sometimes also have a life of its own after it was broadcast live, because it can sort of live on in social media and on YouTube and so on. Perhaps it even be seen by more people post broadcast than it was live on the broadcast. So these are all curious elements to the measurement
That's
aspect, but
absolutely
just to
true.
the craft.
But at least we can measure now. I had an incident, this is going back about 15 years, when a very young public relations person asked a group of journalists online, when you were on paper, how did you measure who was reading which article? And we had said, oh, you might send out the odd survey, but you basically was spray and pray and hope for the best. To which his answer was, yeah, very funny. Please don't patronize me. How did you measure? He could not accept that there had been no way. In the same way, TV interviews, you're right, they can have a life of their own. They can also, if someone's not interested, people can be looking away. You mentioned cuddling up to hubby. I haven't got a hubby, tragic, but I've got a wife. So I have a cat who I might be playing with. There's all sorts of distractions. The TV producers have no way of knowing whether I'm concentrating on what I'm actually watching. So I think there is. there is more scope for measuring now because the chances are if someone deliberately tunes into a particular clip and nothing else, they're going to watch that clip or read that article or whatever they're going to do. So I think from that point of view, it's become easier to measure. But yeah, you're right. If something goes viral, the chances are nowadays it's because someone's messed up.
You did mention something earlier that I wanted to ask you about because I didn't understand about the technique. And with the surname Bridgman in my name, I was interested because you mentioned something called a bridging technique. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about that, please.
Yes, of course. Bridging, every media trainer will tell you there's a distinct technique called bridging. We all use it in our conversations every day, but to articulate it, it's a simple means of building a bridge between the answer that you want to give and the question that's actually been asked, which may or may not bear some relation to each other. So you build it with a sort of ABC technique. That's how you build this bridge between the two. You acknowledge that somebody's spoken, you use a bridging phrase, and then you continue with your answer. Supposing you'd asked me, sort of, did you have one of the worst ever run-ups to Christmas last year because the business just fell off? I don't want to talk about that. So I might say, well, acknowledge, say business goes up and business goes down. It just happens. Then use a bridge like something like, what I'm hearing from my clients now is that this current financial year is one of the most exciting ever, or whatever I want to say. It can be done really mechanically like that, and it would be easily spottable as a fake. Politicians do it all the time. And sometimes you're actually better off saying, look, I really don't want to talk about that. I'm here to discuss now rather than that dodgy few months I had a little while back or whatever else it is. I just think addressing full on is better because people forget sometimes they're not accountable to the journalist.
Yes.
The journalists behave as if they are, and of course, if you sat in front of a journalist, there is, or virtually as we're doing, there is an implied contract that says that, or an implied agreement that says, I will give you honest answers, otherwise I'm wasting your time. But that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily accountable to Steph Bridgeman. It means that I'm very happy to talk to Steph Bridgeman. It's a different relationship there.
So that off-quoted line from the politicians, let's be clear, would that be classed as a bridging technique or a procrastination? Let me get my thoughts together, second or two.
I think yeah, the latter. I think it's a procrastination. Let's be clear. That's a good question. Um, I'm glad you asked me that, which usually means I'm not at all glad you asked me that. And that goes back to Yes
Well,
Minister, that one-liner. Um, if you need to take a second, again, if you need to take a second to think, I honestly think you're better off saying, I need to take a second to think about that. Just say it. And if the journalist then, even if it's live on air on the Today programme or something, if the journalist then says, I need an answer now, you don't work for the journalist. Just say something like, well, I don't want to mislead your listeners with with a wrong answer. Once they've heard that, they can't force you to speed up. It does take confidence to allow yourself to go at your own
but
pace
that
like
builds
that.
that authenticity, I think, that actually people are seeking to convey about themselves. People can be criticised for it, I suppose, but I think that that air of authenticity
You,
shines through.
the people I deal with are not media professionals, apart from their public relations representatives, of course. But my clients are not media professionals. They should not be expected to perform as if they were expert broadcasters or indeed experts in the written media the whole time. We give them a good basis so that they know what's going on. They know they've got an idea of some techniques, not to be bowled over by questions. For example, one tip we always give is before your interview, if you're going to be on screen, which I failed to do completely today, I've just realised, is ask what the first question is going to be. So give yourself a little time to think about it. So at least you start with a confident question. That'll build your confidence as well.
So that I think that links in. There's a line you said before. The first answer wins the game. I think you've said before. Again, probably focusing on that initial 10-second soundbite that might be the one that goes viral. But that's a really good tip to at least both agree the first question, so that you're setting off on the right foot.
Yeah, and if it's a particularly tricky journalist, they may then ask you something else regardless. So you've prepared one thing and they've asked you something completely different because they think you're hiding something. Then it's, I'm sorry, what? You just saw you were going to ask, you throw you completely. But I think, mostly journalists are aware that you're not the expert in being interviewed. So mostly journalists will give you that first question. And if you're into your stride with your first answer, you're going to be thinking, I can do this. And so that is then going to equip you to give better responses, which will make the journalist look better because their objective is to get a good interview together. So it really does work for both of you.
And do you ever get called in during a crisis situation?
I've certainly given people a quick practice interview before an interview. I've helped with crisis communications. One of my favourite clients, before we went virtual, used to have me lurking in a side room with a camera crew. And as the delegates arrived, the guy would say, "Would you like to come and meet the trainer?" And they, polite clients, would say, "Oh yes, please." He'd open the door, camera straight under the nose, and ask them something really awkward. Yeah, I don't think I've been called in, just because someone's about to go on the air. I'd like that. I'd have,
I have seen in some crisis situations. One I particularly recall. Do you remember the Los Angeles fires that devastated the whole areas of the beachfront
yes.
properties a year or two ago? And I think it was the mayor of LA was kind of doorstepped, if the phrase is correct. She was plane stepped. I think she was just getting out of the plane and she was in that area between the plane and the terminal. And I think there must have been a journalist on the same flight, and she was rather abruptly kind of called to answer questions. And I found it very curious because she actually said nothing. She didn't even say no comment, but she sort of said nothing. And I'm intrigued to understand how you may have responded had you seen that scenario play out, and how you may have advised them to do that or to perhaps act differently in such a
I
situation,
think
a
you've
complex
got
situation as that.
when it's a complex situation like that. She would have had a job to do, which is much more than talking to the press because there were lives at stake. So I think what you would do is to say to the journalist, this is an ongoing situation. My role is to go and be with the people who are dealing with it at the moment. We will give you a comprehensive briefing as soon as we can. Please talk to the comms people. I'm in the middle of this. I've got to go and get stuck into do the important work. That's where my focus is. Probably shorter than that as well, but always be polite. And also accept that if you're on a plane, if you've got that sort of public focus, the people around you are on social media. Everybody is a journalist or publisher of sorts these days. So if you were to be saying something, unguarded to your partner, like "I can't wait for this to go away," uh, "don't give a damn about the fires, I just want to get some sleep." That "don't want to give a damn about the fires" said in public, if somebody has heard it and is, "I just heard this from the mayor." I've no evidence to say she said any such thing, by the way. Just let me stress that. This is a hypothetical example. The
Yeah.
person on the seat behind who then goes on X or on Facebook or wherever, and then that goes viral. You're kind of always on the record.
I mean, that's a really fascinating point you make, actually, is that everybody's a potential camera person, and everybody's a potential interviewee that could appear on social media or anything. So we actually all need to be conscious nowadays of
Well,
how we
that's
conduct
right.
ourselves in
And it
public.
gets quite silly in the world of celebrity. Really, you get people who will publish a photograph of Paul McCartney crossing the road or something. Now, unless it's Abbey Road and he's recreating the famous album cover, it's not very interesting. Who knew celebrities had to cross roads? I assume they had buildings built around them wherever. It's just total trivia, but someone puts it out there. And that's a very dated example. I'm sure modern celebrities get it even worse, but at least they grew up in an environment where they kind of knew it was coming. Tell you who I interviewed once, and this is many years ago. They were doing a radio show based on some of Douglas Adams's books, and Harry Enfield was playing Dirk Gently, the detective. He was very polite, very friendly, very welcoming. And this young-ish actor who was playing one of the parts was terrified. She was really very, very nervous, and couldn't wait to get out of the room. She was very polite, totally charming. But when I said to her, "You're not comfortable with this, are you?" And she said, "I'm really sorry. I know I'm not being much help." I said, "It's fine. You've been very helpful." So Olivia Colman has actually gained some confidence since then somehow. I don't know whether she's been
Brilliant.
coached or whether it was just sort of practice. But honestly, every time I see her giving on Graham Norton or giving a speech or with the Oscars or something like that, and she's brilliant because she is, I always reflect back to that and think, "Good grief, you've had to work at that."
I mean, if you reflect on those kind of celebrity panel, not panel shows, but interview shows, I suppose, late
Chat
night, Friday
shows,
night,
yeah.
Saturday night, yeah, chat shows, that's the word. Often it's all about the great anecdote and about this great story, and that can often be the case even in a corporate setting, I guess. Telling something tough or complicated or challenging, but through the use of storytelling.
I think that's completely correct. The storytelling is always more memorable than just figures. Um, I yeah, Figures are great if you're an analyst. If you're an analyst who writes reports that go to potential shareholders or potential buyers of a particular piece of technology, those readers will have vested interest. They will devour the raw data, and you can just present the raw data. If I'm training somebody who has been speaking to analysts, I always say to them, please try to tell me why this technology has made somebody's life better. Tell me about why that's, tell me a story about it. Make it human, because that's always better than a very sort of bland but accurate. We have sold 15% more than we sold last year in spite of the economy turning down 5% or whatever it is.
No, brilliant. So many great tips you shared with us this morning, Guy. I wanted to wrap up this session by thanking you so much for sharing your knowledge and your insights with us. And we look forward to sharing them with the PR and comms community and the measurement community that we hope will see these clips when we post them online soon.
You're more than welcome. Am I allowed to tell them how to get in touch with me?
Absolutely. Please do share where we can find you.
Okay,
We'll
sure.
include that in the notes as well.
If anyone wanted to chat with me, then the easiest way is to drop my assistant Joe a line. That's Jo at clapperton.co.uk. Two P's in Clapperton, and she'll set us up a Zoom, and we will have a conversation, much as we're having now.